Thanks, Chair. Minister, you're very welcome, and your officials. Before I get into some of the aggregate figures, I just want to mention four very quick segments for consideration. One is the voluntary sector, and specifically Section 38 organisations. As you know, the workers in Section 38 or 39 organisations took the same public sector pay cuts and more, but they haven't had any restoration. Lansdowne Road provides for the community sector forum, which is IC2, and your department. Now, they've written repeatedly to you and your department, and repeatedly have been turned down for the forum that is provided for. So could I just put that on your agenda, Minister? I really do think it is something. The voluntary sector workers have taken an extraordinary beating over the years. They have had no restoration. They do need a very serious look at the voluntary organisations having core pay restoration, so that at least they can see something rise in line with public servants. That's the first. The second is, I would just echo Deputy Burton on the arts. We're at 1/6 the European average, and for a country that clearly cares deeply about our arts and our heritage, to be at 1/6 the European average is dreadful. There is an incorrect quote attributed to Churchill, but it's brilliant, which is that when his mandarins came to him in World War II and said, Prime Minister, we need to cut funding to the arts for the war effort, he is alleged to have said, but what are we fighting for? Now, it turns out he didn't say it, but he should have. And I just think it's a brilliant idea that, you know, yes, we need to provide housing, and yes, there are a lot of very serious things that we as legislators and you as a minister need to look at, but let's not forget our soul while we're doing it. The third, Minister, is just an idea. It's to do with Brexit. I've been talking to a lot of SMEs in Wicklow and around the country, and an economist in IBEC told me yesterday that the multinationals account for 90% of our exports. So the indigenous SMEs are 10% of our exports, but 50% of the export-related jobs. And obviously, there are things beginning to happen below the surface, and I just would encourage you to take a look at some funding, probably very small, but for EI and the LEOs to begin reaching out to the SMEs, to start preparing them for what may happen, to start looking at different markets and so forth. The fourth is just a bugbear of mine, which is the privatisation of the broadband network. It's penny wise and pound foolish. I really do believe that if there is additional money to be found in capital, we should keep it in public ownership. It is highly likely that what we will see is exactly what happened when we sold Eircom. We will see monopolistic behaviour, lack of investment where needed, and monopolistic pricing all over the country. So I'll get into the aggregate figures in a second, but can I just put those four areas to you first?
Okay. I'll kick off for each of them. Thank you, Deputy Donnelly. In relation to the voluntary sector and Section 38 organisations.
39, Section 39 organisations.
I'm so sorry, of course, 38. Another group. Section 39. I would come back to you in relation to that. My understanding, Deputy, is that the forum that you're referring to has met. And my understanding is that it has, but I'll come back to you, Deputy, on it,
Thank you.
in case I'm in any way misinforming the Deputy. In relation to the point that you put to me there in relation to wage restoration, of course, one of the challenges in relation to it is the reason why many of these organisations were outside the Lansdowne Road Agreement is in cases of some of them, at least anyway, their wages are raised in other ways. So the future wages of those organisations, Deputy, in many cases is a matter for them rather than for me. But I'll come back to you in relation to the forum.
Can I just
how this matter has been dealt with. Just let me finish off answering the question, and then I'm happy to take any more from you. My understanding is that the forum has met and are dealing with the matter, that a wide variety of different issues are being raised, and that is one of them. But one of the challenges in all this is going to be is that I'm responsible for people who are paid for by the state, directly in particular, and for groups for whom they draw funding from many different sources, and the state is one of them. Clearly the responsibility for the wages for their employees is a matter for them. But on that point.
Thanks, Minister. Yeah, on that point, we'll just have to disagree on this. I don't think it's credible for the state to say we have essential services being provided by voluntary organisations in the community. We, the state, provide in some cases 100% or nearly 100% of the funding, but they're not public sector employees, therefore the wages have nothing to do with us. They obviously do. When during the recession there were very serious cuts taken by public servants and by Section 39 workers because core state funding to these organisations fell considerably. The only way they have of increasing wages is through increases in core funding from the state. So I don't think it's reasonable for you or for anyone in your position or for us as legislators to say it's not really our problem. It really is our problem in my opinion.
Well, I think it is reasonable to outline what I've said there, and I've never said it's not my problem. What I've simply said is there is a distinction between people that the state employs and people the state doesn't employ. That is a reasonable point of view to take. And at no point would I wish to wash my hands of any indirect responsibility we have for those individuals, because I'm aware of the very good work that's done by them. I have many such projects in my constituency, and I see the very good work that they do. And in many cases, they do work which the state either didn't do or can't do as well. But I will come back to you in relation to the point on the forum, because I don't want to mislead the Deputy. In relation to arts, I'm not aware if Winston Churchill said the following, okay? But if he did or didn't, I know you'll correct me. When he said the mark of greatness is the ability to hold two mutually incompatible views at the same time. And this is what strikes me when we get into dealing with all of this. Of course people want more funding for the arts. I want to see more funding delivered to many parts of society, but I have to reconcile it all together. And of course the arts community want to maintain the €50 million. I understand that completely. If I was in their shoes, so would I. But of course that was €50 million that was made available for a unique commemorative year in the history of our state. And what I have to do is reconcile that funding versus the other things the Deputy is talking to me about, the same things. And I'm not sure, and maybe this is something that your committee will refer to, conclude on later on in this process. But if I look at all of the competing needs that you have raised, and they have been many and they're all good, if guidance could be provided to me and regarding how we can maintain that €50 million, while delivering all the other things that deputies have raised, that's input that I'd like to hear. Because I understand the need that is there. I understand why the sector want to do a deputy, but I have to reconcile it with all the other demands that are upon me.
Thank you, Minister. Well, that leads me very well into my next question.
Do you want me to answer your question on Brexit?
Yes, please.
Okay, Brexit and privatisation. In relation to Brexit, I agree with you. And I particularly agree with you regarding the effect this is going to have on small companies. And we're already seeing the signs of this appearing, particularly within agriculture. And one of the things that struck me about the aftermath of the Brexit period is, the government said at the point when that happened that we didn't expect the world to change the following day. But big things are shifting that are going to affect us in the medium term. And the people who are beginning to experience this are small and medium-sized companies that have to sell to other countries, that have to sell to the UK, that need to be able to plan for the future. And this is a matter that I am aware of, that Deputy Mitchell O'Connor is raising with me. And one of the main themes that the Taoiseach has asked me to address is what we can do in Budget 2017 to begin to Brexit-proof our economy. And I accept the point you're raising, and that's something that I hope we'll be able to return to. And then the Deputy asked me the point there in relation to privatisation of the broadband network. Look, I share a different view in relation to this, Deputy. This was a decision that was primarily made by Minister Naughton, though I did feed into it. And, if I look at the future of that network, we are talking about a portion of that network that Just Choice has been made in relation to, as you well know. And we're also talking about a portion of that network which is going to be regulated in a different way, conscious of the learnings that we've had on this in the past. And I know that's one of the reasons that led Deputy Naughton to make this decision, or Minister Naughton. Thank
you, Minister. Our history of regulation at a Comreg is It is atrocious. Maybe we'll learn how to regulate better, but I doubt it. But can I move then on to the next question I have, which is around the balance? So there's a lot of focus on the 1 billion fiscal space and about 660 that comes under your consideration, and less time is given to the other 99% of public spending, which is the business as usual. There's two questions I'd like to raise with you on this, Minister. The first is the committee met with IFAC, who provided analysis post our meeting, which laid out their standstill forecasts. In other words, the amount of money, the increase in spending required by the state to do nothing. And worryingly, if you compare the profile that they've given the committee, it matches almost exactly the projected spending increases. So just for example, in next year, the summer economic statement has projected spending of 54,405. IFAC say the standstill is 54,255. That profile matches right out to 2021. If IFAC are correct, and they're a smart bunch of people doing some sophisticated analysis, if they're correct, then actually the entire projected increase in current expenditure for public services, almost down to the €1,000 for the next 5 years, will be required to do nothing. Now, as I'm sure you know, your department's analysis includes Lansdowne Road and demographics. IFAC includes Lansdowne Road and demographics. They have 700 million more in demographics than your department does. They also include just two other things. One is an index linking of social protection payments, which over a 5-year period at very modest inflation is not an unreasonable thing to assume. And the other is wage inflation, public service wage inflation, but again just at the rate of inflation. So their standstill has zero real increases in wages, zero real increases in any social protections. And yet, almost to the dollar or to the euro, their analysis to this committee is that just doing that requires everything that we need. So that's the first question. And I'll just put in the second one because they're related, which is around balance. So it's to the 99%, Minister. My view is that on arts, for example, we aren't spending enough, right? If we're spending 1/6 of the European average, then clearly that is an unreasonable amount for us to spend. But the question you posed to the committee then is absolutely correct, which is, okay, well, we'd all love to give the arts €200 million or go up to the European average. Where do you want to cut? Education, I believe, hasn't got enough funding. We've seen asset stripping of the third level, is how it was described to me by one university president. Healthcare is an obvious area where we are clearly not getting value for money, where our healthcare system is clearly sick. So we voted through £500 million this year with very little analysis. We voted through over 600 million towards the end of last year. You yourself pointed out, Minister, that we have a very young population. Mm-hmm. Now, depending on which analysis you look at, we have either the second highest or the fourth highest spend on healthcare on earth. But actually, when you do the adjustment, which your officials have done in the expenditure review, which is adjust for the fact that we're younger, therefore healthier, we are completely on our own. We completely outstrip even the US. And so, can I ask you, the first question is on the IFAC comparison, and the second question is, there are clearly areas we should spend more money. I believe the arts, education, voluntary sector, for example. And there are clearly areas where it would appear that we could almost certainly provide the same service for a lot less money. The obvious one is healthcare, and obviously there are more bits and pieces. Can I ask for your opinion to the committee, Minister, on, there's always a lot of talk about where more money should be spent. Where do you think less money needs to be spent in order to do some of the things like housing and education, the arts and the voluntary sector? Thank you. Thank
you very much, Deputy, for your questions. I'll start off with question number 1. We make a provision for demographic expenditure in the outlook that we have for the state. The clearest example of that is where we are in 2017. We have a figure that's laid out there of the 900 million that Deputy Brophy quizzed me on earlier on, a portion of which is for demographics. And that's then laid out in the summer economic statement across the forthcoming years in terms of how we expect that to roll out. Where there is a point of difference, though, between myself and the Fiscal Advisory Council is in relation to the role of indexation and the automaticity of future expenditure increases. I believe that the making expenditure increases automatic in relation to either income payments that we make available to people, or in relation to payments that we make available to people, Deputy. That's the path by which we go down again, the kind of difficulty we're trying to get out of. It has to be a political choice, which the Minister of the day is accountable to the Oireachtas on, regarding do they make increases or changes in relation to income payments to citizens. The moment it becomes automatic, reduces the ability of a government to make changes in expenditure based on the political views of that department, and also creates the kind of sustainability problems that we are doing our best to get out of. Furthermore, in relation to the reform agenda that you've challenged me on, Deputy, and I'll come on to that in a moment, if we end up in a place where there's an expectation of expenditure automatically increasing in particular areas year after year after year, it becomes more difficult for the government of the day to deliver the kind of reform measurements that you want. So I take a different view in relation to that concept of indexation and automaticity, which has in turn influenced the difference between the Fiscal Advisory Council and myself in relation to some of these figures. But I absolutely accept that we need to be budget for demographics in the future, which we have done. But the broad point that you've made in the start of your contribution, there's a lot of truth in, Deputy, which is that the increases in expenditure that we are referring to here, which are going to be 3–3.5% for next year, are a fraction of how much money we're already spending. And much of the debate tends to be on the increment as opposed to the stock of public expenditure. And that leads on to the next point that you put to me regarding where I believe too much money is being spent. Every time I sit down with a government colleague, and every time my officials sit down with their officials, our approach is justify to us how the money that you have is delivering better return. Every day, every discussion that I have with colleagues is around that point. And very rarely do the meetings that I have with my colleagues, particularly the meetings I'm having all of the time at the moment, begin with justify to me how the additional money will deliver additional services. Where it begins with is tell me how the funding that you have at the moment can go further, and particularly tell me how the demographics and capital allocations that many departments will get additional funding for them next year, nearly in an assumed manner. Tell me how that can go further. And all of the discussions begin with that, Deputy. In relation to what departments I believe are spending too much, I believe every department could do more with the funding that's available to them. That's the attitude that I adopt to all of my colleagues, because I believe we have to have a relentless approach on efficiency. But I do believe that great improvements have been made in recent years in that area, but I believe we have to keep on challenging ourselves to do more. I mean, you said yourself, Deputy, that you believe there are areas in the Department of Health in which we could make efficiency savings. Please give me the detail on it. Please do. Because you get into that area in which the majority of expenditure in that area goes on wages, goes for people who we employ. And I'd be very happy to hear your observations, which I'm sure you have, in relation to how we could achieve more efficiencies in that area than we are at the moment.
Thanks, Minister. Can I go back briefly, Chair? Very briefly. Thank you. Thank you for that, Minister. So on the indexation point, actually I agree with you. I don't think it should be automatic, and that's not the point I was making. I believe it is a political decision. So we're agreed on that. However, the point I was making is, regardless of whether or not it is an annual budgetary decision, the figures we have from IFAC clearly show something that we need to understand, and I'd like to know if you accept the point, which is that were we to index, in other words, for the next 5 years, were we to increase payments just at the rate of inflation, So were we to avoid any real decreases, were we to keep things in real terms exactly as they are today, do you accept the IFAC figures that actually we would have to use up everything that is projected to be put into increases in current expenditure? That's the point.
But I have a differing view to them, Deputy, in relation to that nature of indexation. And I mean, I will have a further look at the figures for you to see if there's the scale of gap that you're referring to see if that is there.
Okay.
But so much of the analysis that my colleagues in IFAC are putting forward is put forward on the concept that increases in expenditure have to be automatic. And I disagree with them on that. And it's certainly my understanding of the figures that I've seen that it accounts for much of the gap that we're referring to.